When I was younger, my friends and I would always play big manhunt games in the snow. It was our favorite thing to do during winter. One January night, when we were 13, we decided to play even though there was a crazy blizzard going on. We didn't care. The snow made the game even more fun. There were 6 of us, so we split into 2 teams of 3. The game was kind of like tag, but with more hiding involved. The goal was to make it to a safe spot, which for us was the front stoop of one of our houses. We loved playing in the summer, but the snow made it so much better. The snow gave us places to hide, slowed us down, and even let us use snowballs as weapons to slow down the chasers. It was the most fun we had as kids, until that year when things took a turn for the worse. It was my turn to hide, and my teammates were Dan and Christian. Dan decided to hop the fence into someone's backyard on the other side of the block. It wasn't really cheating since we didn't have any set boundaries for the game. Christian, on the other hand, climbed on top of my friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought I'd be clever, so I ran all around the backyard, creating a bunch of random footprints to confuse the others. When our friends on the other team announced they were coming, I knew I had to think fast. I signaled Christian to get ready to run if needed. Then I quickly hid in some bushes, laying flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy trail of footprints I'd made. I knew it wouldn't take them long to figure out where I was, so I had to be ready to bolt if they got too close. As they got closer to the bushes, Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and made a break for the front lawn. The 2 chasers split up, each going in a different direction after him. I knew the stoop would be guarded now, so I decided to find a better hiding spot. I thought it would be smart to follow Dan's lead and climb onto the roof of the shed, then jump over the fence into the backyard on the other side of the block. But when I got there, I didn't see Dan anywhere. I started looking for his footprints, but instead, I found something else. There were a few boot marks in the snow where Dan must have landed, but then the marks turned into a trail, like something had been pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the house, which was pitch black inside. That's where the trail stopped. My heart sank as I put 2 and 2 together. Something was very wrong. I turned and ran back toward the fence, planning to get out of there and tell my friend's parents. But as I was halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door of the house open. I turned around and saw someone step out. A man wearing a black coat with the hood pulled over his face. He started stomping toward me. Panic set in, and I screamed like a girl as I scrambled over the fence. I barely made it over before he could grab my legs. All my friends came running into the backyard, and not long after, my friend's parents came outside too. I quickly told them what had happened, and the mom immediately called the police. Meanwhile, the dad grabbed a gun and stormed over to the house on the other side of the block. We watched from a distance as he knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so he let himself in. We waited outside, terrified of what might happen next. After a few minutes, he came back out, carrying Dan in his arms. Dan was unconscious, his face red and bruised, as if he had been hit with something hard, like a shovel. There was no car in the driveway, which made us think the guy had fled when I escaped his yard. The man never returned to his house, and as far as I know, he's still wanted by the police to this day. It was a horrifying experience that taught me a valuable lesson. You never really know who might be living right next door. Even the most ordinary-looking person could be a predator, just waiting for the right moment to strike. My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. Last year, my wife and I took a trip to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife loves skiing, so she convinced me to include it in our plans. We had the choice between staying at a ski resort or renting a private log cabin. The cabin seemed more romantic, plus it was cheaper, so we went with that. The cabin was small, nothing fancy, just a single floor with 4 rooms. A bedroom for 2, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Even though it was small, the idea of being secluded in a cozy log cabin during a snowstorm sounded perfect. However, the storm interfered with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do. One evening, as it was getting dark, I noticed there was still enough light outside, so I decided to go out and take some photos and videos of the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back in 10 minutes, then put on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps in the snow leading up to the door. They doubled back, indicating that someone had approached the door and then left. This freaked me out, but I didn't want to scare my wife. Curious, I followed the footsteps around the cabin. They led to our bedroom window, where I saw my wife sitting on the bed with her iPad. She noticed me and waved, so I waved back and continued following the tracks. The footprints led around the cabin to the living room window. Someone had been watching us, but how long ago? I stood there for a minute, deciding whether to keep following the tracks. Something told me to keep going, so I did. The footprints were now leading away from the cabin and into the trees. Then I saw him. A man in a black coat was standing by a tree, hunched over, staring at the ground. He was as still as a statue, with snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze, trying not to make a sound. I wanted to ask if he needed help, but something about him seemed off, like he was some kind of deranged freak. Slowly, I started backing away without turning around, making sure he didn't notice me. Once I was far enough, I turned and hurried back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My wife came over, worried. She could see the fear in my eyes and insisted on knowing what I saw. After a few minutes, I told her. She immediately started packing, saying we needed to leave right away. I refused, not wanting to lose our money by leaving early. I wasn't about to run just because some strange guy was lurking outside. My wife made sure to lock the door and check that all the windows were sealed shut. We spent the rest of the night reading on our iPads and reviewing the photos and videos I had taken. We turned out the lights early since there wasn't much else to do. As we were lying in bed, my wife asked, "What if he's still out there?" I assured her there was no way. The sound of the wind blowing and snowflakes hitting the windows was oddly relaxing, and I felt like I'd fall asleep quickly, until we heard a knock at the bedroom window. We both knew it was a knock from a person. I quickly got my wife out of bed and into the living room without turning on any lights. We didn't have anything to use as a weapon, so our only option was to run. I told my wife to forget about our luggage and just head for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark, and just as we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we ran. I pressed the unlock button on the remote, thankful for the quick access, and we jumped into the Jeep. The car started without any issues, and as soon as the headlights came on, I saw the man again. He was standing by the cabin, not facing a window this time, just facing the wall as if hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort and spent the night there. The next day, we returned to the cabin to collect our things. The man was gone. When I was 17 years old, I had the most terrifying experience of my life, and it just so happened to be on the night I tried pot for the first time. It was mid-December, during a heavy snowstorm. I was home alone, sitting in my room with a movie playing in the background. I think it was Mrs. Doubtfire, but I wasn't really paying attention. I was more focused on figuring out how to properly inhale without coughing. I spent about half an hour trying to breathe in smoke from the pipe, but I couldn't even tell if it was working or if I felt any different. After about 10 more minutes of trying, I finally felt something. It was a strange, new feeling, hard to describe. The room around me seemed more calming, and I felt more aware of my surroundings, or maybe less aware, I couldn't really tell. All I knew was that I felt different. I was excited and wanted to keep going. Suddenly, I heard a sound coming from downstairs. I muted the TV and listened carefully. It sounded like a light tapping noise, like someone was knocking on the front door. I started to get nervous, thinking it might be my parents or sister. I didn't know if I was acting differently or if they would be able to smell the pot in the house. I headed downstairs and looked through the peephole, expecting to see my family, but instead, I saw a man I didn't recognize. He was standing on my porch, severely underdressed for the weather, and he looked almost homeless. To put this in perspective, we don't live in a densely populated suburb, but it's not completely isolated either. Our neighbors are about 200 yards apart, which might not sound like much, but on a dark, stormy night like this, it felt like a good distance. Seeing this random, dirty-looking man standing on my porch was unsettling. I decided to pretend I wasn't home. I stood there, watching him through the peephole as he knocked on the door again, this time louder. I knew I wasn't going to answer, so I quietly walked back upstairs to my room and shut the door. I felt a little guilty, but there was no way I was letting a stranger into my house. I couldn't imagine what he wanted other than to come inside. Time passed, and I continued smoking, starting to get used to the feeling and really starting to feel its effects. My mind began to wander, and I almost forgot I was even in my room. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud thud at my window. I jumped up, startled. It sounded like a rock had hit the glass. I quickly turned off the TV, plunging the room into pitch-black darkness. It took me a moment to realize that the man from the porch might still be out there. I tried to reassure myself that I was safe inside, but being high only made me more paranoid. Every little noise seemed louder and more threatening. Even the usual creaks and cracks of the house made me jumpy. After a few minutes of nothing happening, the darkness started to make me feel tired. I had just learned that pot could put you to sleep faster than sleeping pills. I woke up a little while later, thinking it must be around 3 o'clock in the morning, but when I looked at the clock, it was only 12:41. I had only been asleep for about 20 minutes. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, when I suddenly remembered the man from earlier. My heart started racing again. As I was about to get up, I noticed something across the room. There was something beyond my half-open door. I leaned in, squinting to see more clearly. That's when I saw it. Someone was peering into the room at me from behind the door. I let out the most terrified scream I could manage as the person slowly emerged from behind the door and started walking towards my bed. In the darkness, I could barely make out his features, but I heard him mutter, "I just need a warm place to stay." Panicked, I had no choice but to shove him to the floor as he got closer. It was then that I realized he was very skinny and weak. I managed to drag him up and push him toward the front door. He tried to resist, but he was too weak to do much. I could see the craziness in his eyes, but I wasn't sure how dangerous he really was. I shoved him outside, locked the door, and called the cops. I stayed downstairs, keeping an eye on the broken glass where he had forced his way in, just to make sure he couldn't get back inside. When the cops arrived, they found him curled up in a ball in the bushes outside my house. They took him to the station, and he was no longer my problem. So, do I feel bad about it today? I guess a little. He was clearly crazy, but I don't know how dangerous he actually was. Either way, it was the scariest experience of my life.